But after this war is over, after the dust has settled, after the most destructive chapter has closed, I would say that this is the best for number one, Iran, number two, the United States, number three, in no particular order, like after Iran, I would say uh, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. So again, it's like who it's good for is a long list.
Maybe the main question that people ask is, who is benefiting from this war on Iran?
Ooh, who is benefiting from the war on Iran? Well, it maybe it's even easier to list out who is not benefiting from the war, because the list of like by country, the list of countries benefiting from this war, starting with Iran, would be a long list. But the countries or the blocs that are suffering the most would be the transatlantic financial network countries, or those networks within those countries, really, not the countries themselves. This is actually good for everybody. We're talking about the consequences of the war. We're not talking about like when bombs kill people, I hope, right? Um, War is never good, right? Like war is never good for any people, for the country receiving war, for the country perpetrating war. It undermines the spirituality and the ethics and morality of the people waging the war. It also undermines their legitimacy. Um, so I compare it to a world that there's always the comparison to a world that would be better, which is always easier to imagine, I think, for people than a world that would be worse. So, but after this war is over, after the dust has settled, after the most destructive chapter has closed, I would say that this is the best for number one, Iran, number two, the United States, number three, in no particular order, like after Iran, I would say uh, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. So again, it's like who it's good for is a long list. The losers in this conflict, again, it's hard to speak in terms of countries, but in terms of the power arrangements and the power arrangements in a country, I would say that for the radical Zionists of the Likudniks in Israel, this is the worst for them. For the EU on its present trajectory with its energy politics, it's the worst for them. But I want to emphasize that it will be good ultimately for people in Israel. It will be good ultimately for people in the EU. But this is a wake up call, more than a wake up call. This is maybe even regime change that we're seeing in Israel and regime change in the EU. Um, I'm very uncomfortable talking about the positive aspects of war, but realistically, those are the outcomes. Um, it's not a popular take because people are very committed ideologically to different political motifs and themes. And I try to detach myself from those. Like the people who are very pro present Iranian government and they're looking at it very one dimensionally. Um, they're not seeing a bigger picture, even though I think they would agree with me that through this, like this Iran will be stronger. So this is not about regime change in Iran. Like this present Iran, this present theocracy, this present Islamic Republic will come out of this stronger. They will control the Strait of Hormuz, whereas before they only threatened to take control of it. Now they've been forced to take control of it. This is very normal, like the Panama Canal, like the Suez Canal. Countries that control it, the Bosphorus, Turkey, right? Egypt with the Suez, and Panama with the Panama Canal. Like those countries extract a tax or a passage fee, and Iran had not done that. Now they will do that. So it's Israel has been in a very dysfunctional cycle of violence and politics of paranoia and hatred with Arabs and Iranians for countless decades. This is where this has got them. This is where those attachments and those fixations, those obsessions, this is where this karma has led. It's a wake up call. It's never gonna bring back dead people in Iran. It's never gonna bring back dead people in Israel. That's why it's difficult to speak in terms of like the silver lining that these clouds have. But I see them.
Thank you, Joaquin. Sometimes really people forget the history, that sometimes it could be bloody. It could be like really, it just, you don't want it to happen. So sometimes I tell my people, when we talk about the history of the Philippines, we always say, well, could you imagine if, there was no such revolution? So where would have been us right now? So, it's just nice that we weren't born on that time, but sometimes these things have to happen. So when I first heard about it, because I was in the Philippines already when I heard the attack on Iran. And then, of course, like I'm knowing that, I'm not really for bases, for US bases in different countries. Then I said, well, if I have to look at it, that's good. That's good that, those things are happening. I don't want to be a family member related or be there. And then it's interesting lately that the things that people silently say about what's going on in Gaza or in Israel are now, they themselves are saying it now. Even Trump doesn't have to say it. So now it's like, so that, the change could be perhaps a little bit more permanent. People had We have been in the system for a century or more. So it's kind of cleaning a closet, or even worse, is like you had to really let go and change and things like that. So thank you. um so I just wanted to ask more about why do you think suddenly it happened now and not before? What could be a strategic event that could lead it here? Because I know you always say a plan within a plan. So were you kind of like anticipating that it may happen soon? Like,
No, I didn't have a forecast that we would have a conflict of this scale, but I would say that in thinking about the scale of this, it's actually pretty scaled down. Again, I don't want to minimize, like, the problem is that ethically, one death is a tragedy, and 100 deaths is one tragedy times 100. 1,000 deaths is one death times 1,000 in its ethical dilemma and its tragedy. But when we scale to the history of wars, when hundreds of thousands of soldiers, millions of civilians are killed, when the attacks are on critical infrastructure that sends millions more internally or externally displaced, this is not that type of war. And it's weird to talk about it or to minimize it, but I had been explaining a couple of weeks ago on another podcast with someone that this is a pretty small war, and a lot of the images that we're seeing are AI generated. And, you know, when I follow Iranian press pretty carefully, and I follow Israeli press pretty carefully, and they're reporting out, again, every death is a tragedy, but every few days they're saying, oh, 6 people were killed or 10 people were killed, which look, I'm against all war. I'm also against preventable diseases, but more people are dying from heart disease in a small country than have died in this war. It's just not to relativize it, but I mean, what do we compare it to? Can we compare it to other wars? Like, what's a legitimate matrix to compare the scope of a war? And then it's like, how real is the war? What is the war? What is really happening in the war? What can we really confirm is the reality of the war? You see? So it's something that clearly the United States and the Iran have been trying to make an agreement. And clearly there's one country in the world, and only one, that doesn't want them to make that agreement. And that country is Israel. Not because it's good for all Israelis, not because it represents the aspirations of all Israelis, but there's a political faction in power in Israel that's also pretty unpopular, that has been pushing for a cataclysmic war on Iran. And this is not the war that they got. They wanted a regime change and a failed state. They're not getting that. And looking at the days leading up to February 28th, when the war started, you could see very clearly that an agreement was being made, that they were agreeing on everything. They didn't have any areas of disagreement. And then all of a sudden, like on the 26th, there was kind of weird communications from Rubio to the effect of, or from Witkoff to the effect of not being happy with something in the negotiations. And then Israel attacked out of nowhere on the 28th, and the United States joined in for reasons that Rubio explained. Within the logic of that, his explanation seemed pretty transparent. I'm not a Rubio fan at all. But they were shockingly transparent and very uncontroversial. Like, that is what within the context of you're already there, you have your bases in the region. That is what the Pentagon would recommend, because the Pentagon makes recommendations based upon not political proclivities, but based upon the facts on the ground. But as the consequence of this war, the United States is not going to have bases in the region. Trump said he didn't want bases in the region 10 years ago. The Saudis and others have said we don't want these bases here for a long time. These were there because AIPAC, because Likudnik politicians have been pushing the Lindsey Grahams and the Ted Cruzes into our Congress to create and establish those bases based upon a doctrine from decades ago, doctrines that no longer apply to the world, doctrines that you can see published in think tank journals from the Rand Corporation and the Brookings Institute and the Project for a New American Century from 2012, 2008, Pathway to Persia, 2015. That's like the most recent that you're going to find. And everything that those organizations have been printing since has been talking about justifications or reasons why these older projects never were realized. Why aren't people talking about those? They just act like time stopped in 2012. I won't go there, but this is a very strange conflict because we're talking about fifth generation warfare. We're talking about AI plus hyperreality. Like hyperreality, Baudrillardian hyperreality was already a main aspect of fourth generation warfare. And fifth generation warfare, you can't even really be you can't even use audio visual OSINT sources to determine if things are happening. Like you see strikes, 5 years ago, imagery of a fake strike would be something that could be called out pretty quickly because it would be like real from some other conflict. It would be like footage from another location, different war that someone on Twitter was trying to pass off or someone on YouTube was trying to pass off as from a present conflict. Now you have things that are totally generated and they're almost, or I would say completely, in some cases, indistinguishable from reality.
Thank you, Joaquin. I'll pass it on to Hartmut.
Wait a minute. No, hello, Joaquin. It's a pleasure to have you here on the show. And yeah, I think this is a complete new scale of war because we have, on the one hand, we have the direct military involved participants, which is USA, Israel, and Iran. And at the same time, Iran is attacking the Gulf states. So Iran is attacking the economy of the whole world. And the effect of this new kind of warfare is, affects all of us. And it looks for me that everyone, like you said, everyone is benefiting of this war, except the people. For example, here in Germany, we think that there will come an energy lockdown already, and we have, for example, the oil shortages which we have right now. They are man-made because there are so many vessels with diesel and with gas which are waiting to the approval for entering the port of Rotterdam, but they don't get the approval for weeks already, in order to increase the prices. And in my opinion, there are no stupid politicians. They are only the face of stupidity, because the face of evil is much worse. The intention, what is behind that. And for example, we have here a law where it says that the oil industry has to prove why they want to increase the price. So if an oil industry has to explain why they have to increase the price, they will go to somewhere else. So you can see that this war is affecting all countries, and it looks like that we are going into an energy lockdown. Do you think this as well?
Yeah, I think that you are going to go into an energy lockdown because in Europe, in Western Europe, in the EU, you have elected, not you personally, you were doing the right thing. I mean, Europeans, Germans, French, Belgians, broadly, the Italians, the Spanish to a lesser extent, have paid insufficient attention to the need for a broad and robust Euroscepticism, but really to push back against the City of London financiers that have required Europe to have a stupid and incoherent energy policy, meaning no nuclear. Number one, you're not allowed to have nuclear. You have some, but not really. Number two, you have wind farms that don't produce energy. You have solar, which does not produce energy. It costs more and it never amortizes out the right way. Then you were supposed to be importing fuel since the 1970s from the Soviet Union. Some generation back then, around the time that you were a little baby, had the idea that if we could attach Western Europe's energy needs to the Soviet Union, and if we could build up Western Europe's military capacity sufficiently with NATO, then if we made a political decision to cut Europe off from Soviet energy, then you would be forced to invade the Soviet Union to open up the energy that you were dependent on. What is, after all, Europe's energy doing underneath Russia's soil? So this didn't happen. So you don't have nuclear. You don't have, there are energy sources in Europe that you're not allowed to tap. You're not allowed to do those for environmental reasons. Then, since sanctions and Putin is the bad guy, you've been winding down from Russian increasingly since 2015 or 16. Now Germany is the least competitive economy of all G7 countries. You're paying 2 to 3 times now, 2.5 times the average cost of G7 energy. So where does that lead German industry? What are your solutions? Well, you can borrow, and you can borrow to build an army. That would be the best investment by the metric of this old thinking, is that you borrow and borrow to build an army that you can take from the Russians your energy. And that can be taking Ukraine back, or taking the Donbass energy, the resources rather, the REs, and then selling those for energy. It could be just taking Russian energy. It could be trying to bring Georgia and Azerbaijan into the European Union, maybe in some fantasy, and then you have the Baku oil fields, and you could have direct access through Turkey and the EU. I don't know. These were like long baked plans, man, but they're done. But these were the ideas of the age in the 70s, when like, we're gonna have Turkey in the EU. This was like, basically just take the blueprint of the Third Reich. Just take the blueprint of the Third Reich, and then just make it happen slowly over time. Instead of a blitzkrieg in 1 or 2 years, just expand it over 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Like the frog in the boiling water. And include Turkey, include Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, and then you're going to have the Caspian energy. You're going to have the Caucasus energy. You're going to have maybe you'll have Russian energy, break Russia up. I mean, so this was the long game from generations ago, but they don't pan out. And then they say, look, in 10 years, this is not realistic. Then they revise. But the industries that grow up around it can't be revised, because these take on a life of their own. It's like a charity that solves the disease that it was established to solve, still has they're going to just have to redefine the disease to keep the money coming in. They're not going to just end the charity, right? So, and all of these are subsidized think tanks, military industrial complex, strategists, Hartmut, they were holding awards and whole packages for students to go through European schools, from Ukraine, from Georgia, from Azerbaijan, Dagestan, and parts of Russia, to come up with how would we divide Russia up into 14 different countries? What would that look like? What is the process of getting there? And they awarded scholarships based upon that. So the problem is, you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you have this legitimate concern about the hazards that nuclear energy poses. But originally, it was an anti-nuclear weapons movement. And through the 80s, it starts to transform into anti-nuclear power movement. And yes, you can say, oh, within 3 square kilometers of this plant, the cancer rates are 15% higher. These are real issues. Like, people should not live close to these things. Maybe in the future, we have next generation research into making them safer. Maybe we remove the profit incentive from the manufacturing of the plants so that they don't cut corners. Things like this could be done. There are also present generation nuclear energy facilities that don't produce the risk. So, but this has been not an accident. This is not stupidity. That would be a liberal criticism of power that is designed to flatter the citizens into thinking that, oh, our leaders are just so stupid, if we could just elect smart people. No, this is a control paradigm from a strategy of the Americans and the British that did this once before when they brought Hitler to power.
Yes. And I see it from this point of view that they use this war in Iran and between right now for the transformation of the Western world in a technocracy of the big tech companies. And first of all, for example, here in because of the war, you don't have only 20% less in oil and gas, but also 30% less in fertilizer. And in Europe, we have here, also in Italy and in Germany especially, we have so many ecological laws that the farmer cannot produce right wheat anymore on the soil, so that the wheat can be only used for swine and not for bread, because the protein is so low. And if we understand now, with the oil shortages and the energy lockdown, the deindustrialization will go much faster. So we are going to become, in Europe, it will become a civil war.
Yes, in Europe. But this is a Europe-only problem, Hartmut. The rest of the world is flourishing now. The rest of the world is not having this problem. Iran is not ahead. Listen, brother, United States is coming out ahead. England will come out ahead when they line up with the US. This is the ongoing scam. Europe always pays for Britain's deception.
Yes.
Repeat after me. Europe always pays for Britain's deception. Britain will not pay for this. Europe will pay for this. Europe is the one that's middled out in the Ukraine war. US and Russia will ally against Europe.
Yes.
That's what I said at the beginning of this conflict in Ukraine. This is the same pattern in history. This is World War II stretched out over longer time.
But what is about Asia? Because the Strait of Hormuz is now blocked. Asia, for example, Thailand or Philippines.
This is fake news. This is fake news from Bloomberg and Financial Times. Strait of Hormuz is open for China. Strait of Hormuz is yes. Iran is producing more oil. They produced 100,000 more barrels of oil in the month of March than they had a year ago in the month of March. The price has doubled. You see, so Iran, Trump, all of this was foreseeable. You see, why was the war so inadvisable? Why was the war on Iran so inadvisable? It wasn't, because of the soldiers that you lose, because you don't need to have soldiers in a bombing and aerial campaign that destroys a country's infrastructure. Well, here's the catch. They're not destroying the country's infrastructure. but it was foreseeable what would happen. So if you have everything is judo, right? If you have this force, these neocons, Zionists that are saying you must have a war in Iran, you must have a war in Iran. You instead of trying to push back, you say, well, have your war in Iran. Flip them over your shoulder, have your war in Iran. But what's going to happen is all the predictable things that they were warned about. Well, Iran will take control of the Strait of Hormuz. Aha, so have a backroom deal with Iran about how you divide the Strait of Hormuz income. Fuck the Zionists, fuck Europe, fuck the British, right? How do you have a deal directly with Iran? How does Russia and China benefit? You see, well, they're going to have access. Europe and Britain are the only people asked out of this right now. They're the only people asked out of this.
That's right. I agree with you 100%. But do you think that America will become great again, or do you think that America will become also, let's say, in depression and also rising of, let's say, mafia structures, etc.?
Well, yes. I mean, this is a very important question. It's good to have a memory, Hartmut. Like the idea that the United States is a capitalist country that is run and controlled by an oligarchy comprised of the capitalist class did not happen when Whitney Webb discovered something 6 months ago about some big tech people. This is how the United States was founded. It's how the West has been structured since the dawn of the colonial period, since the 17th century, right? Since the Enclosure Acts in Britain in the 16th and 15th, 17th century. Like this has been since Venetian banking in the 1500s. Like this is 500-year-old phenomenon that Western societies are controlled by a capitalist financial class. So this is not a new phenomenon that just happened because Trump tricked people into voting for him. These are the givens of the situation for half a millennium. You see? So it's not like a new conspiracy here. This is like, in other words, Hartmut, everyone all of a sudden has become like a libertarian socialist or anarcho-communist. Everyone all of a sudden, they don't think they are. They think they're against communism or they're against libertarianism, but they're actually both. They're like, what's their alternative? You want to have a totally horizontal society with no rulers and no bosses and like, yes, that's a beautiful dream if you're under 30 years old. I think there are some profound spiritual truths about, more like the kingdom of heaven or how we're all equals before God. Like that's true. But the idea that society is not structured hierarchically and has been for time immemorial, you see, if you think otherwise, this is like Don Quixote, you're going to be tilting at windmills. So it's like nothing is new with this, but the question about like what will happen, well, the United States has agreement with Venezuela. United States is going to seize Greenland. Venezuela has larger proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. Greenland has between 30 and 50 billion barrels equivalent worth of energy, oil and natural gas combined, which the Danish king and the British king and the City of London and the Brussels bureaucracy have agreed not to tap into. Why? Well, because then you would have energy independence. Then you would not have this problem. Well, they want you to have this problem. United States can save you. So things are going to be fine for the United States. Like we're going to have no problem with energy prices. It's only Europe that's having a problem. Not even Serbia is having a big problem. Like our energy, our diesel went up like 20, 25 dinars per liter. That's it. And we took 50 dinars off the tax to arrive at that. We could actually be paying less if we had less tax, right? But we're connected with Slovakia and Hungary. We're actually directly connected with Russian energy. So we don't have a problem either. If you're hooked up with Russia or the US, you're good, man. If you're hooked up with the Brussels bureaucracy and you're dependent on City of London financiers that make your political decisions and energy outcomes, you're fucked. That's the
No, Germany is fucked because, for example, Nord Stream 2 is destroyed, and now the Americans are going to buy the Nord Stream 2 companies, and that's it. Yeah, and then they control Nord Stream 2 and 1. So you can see
Yeah.
it's all about America. They
Yep.
want to fuck up Germany because we have 43 million tons of lithium equivalent carbonate,
Yes.
the 8 million tons of lithium, and they want to get it as cheap as possible. And Germany, this is a problem.
Think about this. Think about this, Hartmut. Just if you don't know off the top of your head, like get it on your little Google machine there. Like how much is a €1 today worth in pre-pandemic 2018, 2019? Just tell me, like if you can look it up. Or if you know off the top of your head.
Oh,
just loosely, not exactly, but just
let's say you have an average 20%. Oh, maybe €1. Let's say the one rice.
yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, I would say that what if I had €1 in my pocket today in Germany, right? If I was 5 years ago, it would buy me about €1.40 of stuff.
Yes.
€1.40. Okay. So if we're talking about oil, up until a month ago was 70-ish euros per barrel, right? That's actually 50 euros per barrel. So actually we had historic low prices of oil up until this Iran war. Like, in other words, $100 per barrel oil is actually equivalent to $70 per barrel oil in 2019, adjusted for inflation. So in many ways, all this conflict has done is brought energy to inflation price, to the actual prices adjusted for inflation. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I think that energy prices could be lower and that fuels growth, but also rapid growth can increase inflation. There's a lot of complex variables. It's a multivariate issue, but you could have you just need Zelensky, right, to unstick unstick this war, unclog the pipelines, open up the brotherhood and friendship pipelines, and start powering up.
Yeah.
And nuclear.
Yeah.
Thorium reactors. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. I give you to Nick. Thank you.
Thanks for including me, Grace. Well, I had watched Trump's speech to the American people last night. As I was, can you hear me? Am I coming through okay? Is my internet okay?
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Perfect.
So, but also, just really getting over the whole Artemis experience the whole day, learning about space and everything and the history of astronauts in general. But so anyway, so Trump really didn't talk a lot about that. And, what's interesting to me is that watching like ABC News coverage of the Trump speech was that they were all pretty like flustered and frustrated because he didn't say anything new and he didn't throw any bones. So they pretty much just go back and forth between each other, regurgitating the same talking points to each other. So really, I interpret it as like their frustration with Trump not giving them any information, so they really can't give the public any information. And it really shows how irrelevant they've become because they're just basically citing his Truth Social posts and like funneling it into their paradigm. And so it's like they're frustrated that Trump's lying to them because they inevitably can't go ahead and lie to us because they can't know what's going on. So I don't know if you want to speak to. I know you went in on Crypto Rich really good about Trump's messaging, but I find it just really interesting the way that he, especially last night, just communicated. He didn't talk about ground troops, but he basically didn't give any new information. And I don't know if there's a alignment between when Artemis is or when Integrity, the spaceship through the Artemis mission, is supposed to conclude its orbit, its 10-day orbit, with the conclusion of the Iran conflict. So
I thought that was a brilliant insight and way of thinking about how messaging and events come together and, kind of like put a bow on it. Like, I think that was very insightful. That had not even occurred to me, but the minute that you mentioned it in the Green Star New Resistance chat, I I said, yes, I thought to myself, like, that easily that could be what they do. I did think that when I watched some luncheon comments. I didn't watch the thing because of the hours. I haven't even watched it yet. I was recording with Rich this morning and I haven't even caught up with news. So I don't even know what he said in full, but I saw maybe a clip from yesterday from his luncheon comments before his big announcement comments, that when he was relativizing the conflict and saying, World War II was this number of years and this number of soldiers people killed, this, war was this. And then he goes, and this war was 32 days. And I'm like, is he saying it's over? I mean, because you don't talk about something in comparison. I mean, when World War II was 30 days in, it was only 30 days in, so it made you think that the conflict is over. And then when he was talking about the leadership in Iran, he talks in a funny way because 99% of the people that read his posts are, below average cognitively, so, or have no historical memory or don't know what's going on in the world. So they think, oh, Trump said there's a new president of Iran. Like, I can think of all the wine Karens in the world being like, yeah, he did it. Did you hear Hegseth? Yeah, they had regime change. Yeah, they had regime change. Oh, yeah, there's a new president now. Oh, yeah, we did it. Oh, we decimated their army. Oh, yeah, it's over now. So that's what this is called the political reality. And the political reality is that Trump talks and a lot of people believe it. And the people that have Trump derangement syndrome aren't going to believe anything he says, even if it's true. So it's irrelevant. Truth is kind of, as they said, post-truth reality kind of works in a funny way. So he can just, like I said, he can just declare the war is over. I said this at the start. I said, there's no problem with an exit strategy because they've never defined the goals. All they have to say is mission accomplished. He just has to get on the aircraft carrier with the mission accomplished banner and say mission accomplished. But why do that when you can play the starting, stopping game? And Israel hasn't taken a sufficient beating yet. They haven't seen the light. Iran is going to be fine. They got 94 million people. That the military hasn't been touched. I mean, of course you're going to have satellites or anti-air that get targeted, but we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the regular army and the IRGC. Like, those guys are not, like, soldiers have not engaged, in conventional, right, like shooting and stuff like you see in Ukraine with Russians and Ukrainians. Like, we haven't had that war. If we have that kind of war, there's no way the United States would need 1 million soldiers to get. I don't know. Drago has a better idea. I'm more curious what Drago has to say at this point about that angle.
Well, I mean, I think you're on point 100% because back in the early 2000s, the U.S. had about 300,000 soldiers they could deploy in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And both of those areas are far easier to conquer than Iran, because Iran is like you either have these enormous mountains or you have these salt badlands in the east of the country. So in both cases, you'd be screwed up. You'd be screwed if you try to engage directly. So, and Trump said there's about 10,000 soldiers. 10,000 Marines who would move into Iran, but they wouldn't really move into Iran. They would move into coastal areas or some islands or something to isolate the battlefield. But even that would be a very bad idea, because I want to remind people the Russians tried to do that with the Snake Islands, and the Ukrainians just kept sending drones and missiles, and it's almost impossible to maintain supply lines and to establish a good base of operations for further attacks inland, because simply you're an easy target. This is a different form of warfare that we have nowadays. Everything is there, you can see everything, and even if the Iranians don't have ISR being intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, then the Russians and the Chinese would provide that. So in essence, it's very difficult to move large concentrations of troops because everything is seen. And because everything is seen, you can then launch drones, or you can launch missiles. And of course, the problem is, what we've seen so far from Iran is that their military is able to pretty much smash all the bases, because those are bases. They're not mobile. You can't move them. You can't really, shoot down everything that's incoming. And even worse, I want to quote the MIT professor Theodore Postel, who has been warning about the missile defense concepts that the United States military is using, and that they're atrocious. He said, 35 years ago, he said that the Patriots cannot do anything against even basic ballistic missiles. And this is what we've seen in Ukraine. This is what we've seen in Iraq in 2003, in 1991, and then before that as well, and afterwards. And back in 2018, the Saudis with Greek-operated Patriots couldn't, stop Houthi missiles and drones. And how do you expect to do it against a country like Russia or Iran? So in essence, it's very difficult to maintain any kind of, persistent air campaign against a country that can just destroy your bases. We see how they go. It literally unravels, because what we first had, we had these over-the-horizon radars that were looking into Iran, and these were destroyed by $35,000 drones, and these cost billions of dollars. And then what the U.S. had to do is it had to move in these AWACS-type aircraft like the E-3 Sentry, and they had to deploy them in bases. So what happened? Iran just struck those bases, and then the U.S. had to move those aircraft further away from Iran. And then in order to have those aircraft, function, you need aerial tankers like the KC-135 Stratotanker. So then those also got destroyed. So in essence, we see that this entire idea that you can wage a war against a country like Iran is well, I'm not going to say it has completely failed, but it's extremely difficult and requires a lot of resources. And the U.S. cannot do this while also maintaining a global empire. It's impossible to maintain American power projection capabilities in South Korea, in the Middle East, and Ukraine, and Latin America simultaneously. If you had simultaneous wars, the U.S. would be crushed pretty much by these regional powers or global powers trying to expand their own zones of influence. Imagine, for instance, if North Korea decided to start a war with South Korea, and then Russia decides to launch a massive counteroffensive in Ukraine, and then China does the same in Taiwan, the entire U.S. system would collapse. So in essence, it's best if Trump can just maintain some kind of diplomacy with other multipolar powers and see how to conduct damage control and just prevent escalation, I would say.
Well, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and basically they would have to pull out from everywhere in the world just to focus on Iran. And what you're saying is that in so doing, then everything else would pop off too. So that's obviously not going to happen. Or not, right? But it certainly is a big indicator that they wouldn't do such a thing unless they wanted China to take Taiwan, or unless they wanted Russia to launch a big offensive. And maybe if they're going to troll Europe into taking some role in Iran, or telling them, hey, if you want, because that's what Trump was trolling them last. He was saying, hey, if you want to take Hormuz, he was basically deflecting off of the possibility of accusing Trump or the US of chickening out and not being brave enough to take Hormuz. He's like, we never needed it, but if you're brave enough, you should take it. So he kind of did a reversal on the messaging. And if there's no way, I mean, Europe doesn't have the UK could muster 18,000 soldiers at this time, period. 18,000. That's the study from pretty recently. So that was a UK parliamentary study. This is not like someone else's study. This is what the UK said about themselves. They said we can muster less than 20,000. That's it. Can you imagine where that wouldn't get you anything in Iran, right? Like that wouldn't get you anywhere. So,
You know,
and then Iran,
I
yeah,
just want to. I just wanted to add something to that, just to to prove your point. They recently did a NATO drill with the Ukrainians, and it turns out that 10 Ukrainian drone operators, like I say again, 10, like it's not 100, it's not 1,000, it's 10 guys with drones. They managed to stop 2 full battalions of NATO soldiers in this drill. So 2 full battalions of, that's like 6,000 soldiers, and then another 16,000 could move forward. So you need 10 guys who have battle experience to stop an army of people who have been trained by bureaucrats. So I mean, and this is an army. The Ukrainian army has a 13-to-1 death ratio against the Russians. There's over 2 million dead Ukrainian soldiers against 163,000 Russian casualties that have been confirmed by pro-Western media in Russia. So can you imagine how NATO would wage war against Russia if they can't do it even against Ukraine? So in essence, like, I don't understand why Europe is even trying to get into this. Although what I see happening now is we see all these attacks on Russian oil terminals in the northwest around St. Petersburg. What I think they're trying to, and I would like Joaquin's thoughts on this, because what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to push Russia into reacting and then attacking the Baltic states and Finland. And then they could like repair NATO relations and try to get the US on board. And I think the Russians are not reacting because they understand that NATO is essentially dying now, and they don't want to go, and repair NATO by attacking these countries. They're just going to, try to maintain this like sort of strategic patience and not engage in at all until Trump is done with Iran. I'm not sure. What do you think about that, Joaquin?
yeah, absolutely. Like let's say that you have a retirement, and let's say that you give your retirement money over to some portfolio management, investment firm, right? Now, once they have it, they have it. Like, remember that South Park episode where they like try to invest the money, and then they give the money to the guy and he goes, okay, and it's gone, like that. Well, if so, they can declare it. They can do that. So the European Union has all of this money, all of this investment into the idea that they're going to take back the Donbass and Crimea from Russia. Like, they've put all this European asset and investment in all these firms. This was on the basis of the Lugano format on the reconstruction of Ukraine. And then the follow-up was conducted in London. And what they did, that's when each country said, okay, we're signed up to be the rebuilders of these regions by regions of Ukraine once we evict the Russians. So that's like, Ukraine is a huge amount of wealth, and 60 to 70% of all of Ukrainian wealth is in the 25% of Ukraine that Russia now controls. But so they can't, the reason that Zelensky can't say, okay, we're going to agree to give up the Donbass is because then all those investment firms couldn't keep up the fiction that was recoverable. You see, like, even though anyone with a brain understands that they're never going to get it back, until it's actually verbalized, they can maintain the fiction that they're going to get it back. So they don't actually have to market the realistic value of those burnt investments. They can pretend that those are recoverable and they're going to be profitable. So that's where all this shit is. They're just basically, you have this whole rehypothecation scam, and they're evergreening these investments that are never going to be recovered. So therefore, the only way out is in for them. They're like, we need to expand the war. Like, Zelensky is out if he cannot keep the war going or expand the war. And the only way to keep the war going is to expand it. Because if you just keep it contained to Ukraine, then Russia just eventually, within a year or two, takes the whole thing or whatever they're going to do with it. Then it'll be over for that reason. But if you can expand it into Serbia, if you can get Albania and Croatia to surprise attack Serbia next week, or if you can get, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to allow its airspace or whatever, or to attack Russia covertly, and then Russia's actually acting in response, but the Western media acts like Russia attacked first. You know the game. Then they can expand the war. But these attacks on Russian energy facilities are going to backfire, right? Because that just increases the price on world market. Russia said what? As of today or tomorrow, they're stopping for a month or two exporting their energy, right? What? So they're saying like, oh, you want to, okay, well, here, take this. So now what's Europe going to do? What's Ukraine going to do? Ukraine, like Grace was talking about rationing in the Philippines. What do you think Ukraine's going to do with the logistics, a military machine? Like, they have to buy that energy. They have to buy that gasoline. And all of those Lamborghinis, all those Bugattis, all of those Bentleys that you see in Hungary and places of Ukrainian oligarchs on the streets of Budapest, right? Because they don't even fuck around. They don't even fuck around in Ukraine. They just party in Europe. You see them in Monte Carlo, and right, you see them in San Marino. So what's that should have gone to your rainy day fund, you fucking morons, Ukrainians. That should have gone to your worst case scenario of the war fund. But every Ukrainian oligarch is somehow, subconsciously a Putin asset, because instead of investing that into Ukraine's long-term war effort, they siphoned, like, they didn't just take 2% off the top. They took like 80% off the top of that. They just like squandered that on real estate all around the world. There's like people that bought penthouses in Singapore, right? People that bought like beachfront property in Spain. Just hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in graft. And now they can't afford gas. And then they're going to attack Russian energy. Like, where's the price of gas going to go now? And now with this attack in Iran, where are we at now? 110 a barrel, 106, 115 3 days ago.
Well, I think Putin is doing that because he knows Ukrainian oligarchs very well, because Russian oligarchs are exactly the same. And I when I talk to the Russians, they say, and I've never really thought about it this way. This is why many people don't even understand Russia. Like, you need to talk to Russians to understand what's going on. I told them, like, what you guys are doing about all the money, that's left in the West and it's frozen. And then they would tell me, well, much of that is not even our money. It's the money of the oligarchs who are controlling our economy. It's good for us that this is frozen, and these guys who are siphoning out money out of Russia can do shit now. And the Ukrainians are doing the same thing. I mean, Ukrainian oligarchs are doing the same thing. Like, most people don't even realize that much of Russia's economy before it was nationalized, such as the Gazprom, was actually under the control of these like very bad people, the oligarchs, who were working for anyone who would, who would give them more privileges. And the Russian government essentially has been re-sovereignizing the country after the start of the conflict in 2022, essentially.
Let me elaborate on that theme, because what you tapped on is super important, just on the question of Russia and Ukraine. There's actually no such thing as a Ukrainian oligarch. Like, there are Ukrainian country bumpkins. All the Ukrainian oligarchs are basically Russian speaking. Like, Ukraine was like an offshore location for Russians that didn't want to subordinate to making Russia great again. That's what Kiev as a location is. It's like the Bahamas or Cyprus or Dominican Republic. It's like having an offshore banking. It's like Swiss banking for Russian oligarchs. It's like where the Russian oligarchs went that didn't want to pay taxes or didn't want to subordinate to the reforms in Russia, they became Ukrainians. I mean, they just went to Kiev with their money. So it's just there's no such thing as a Ukrainian oligarch. In fact, these are just like the Russian oligarchs that got away from Putin. And that's how they see themselves. They see themselves as like an external faction of Russians. What's his face explained it very well. That one that's kind of like Zelensky's advisor, ex-friend, actor guy. His name is slipping my tongue right now.
Oh, I know you mean. I forgot the name.
We were talking about him a lot like a year or two ago. Arestovich. Arestovich is the one that explains all this like very well. He's like, there's no such thing as a Ukrainian. We're just like the degenerate Russians that like don't want to pay taxes and don't want to help make Russia great again, basically.
May I mention something especially concerning this topic? In the kickback deals. Kickback deals means that you have a sender and you have a receiver, and normally they make a split of 45-5, 45-5. But for example, in the case with the Europeans, I suppose theoretically it can be 65-5 and 30% for this receiver. For example, the sender gets more money for the tax money goes to Ukraine, and then it was sent by Germany or by European Union, and then 70% goes back to the sender, and 30% goes to the Ukraine, for example.
Yeah, you're talking about a kickback embezzlement scheme.
Yes, correct. And this is the reason, because both side benefits of this kind of business.
Well, look, if let's say you're Germany and you're gonna give money to Ukraine, but it's not cash, it's also in kind. So you're actually fulfilling contracts for German military industrial complex. So that's the legit way, and it's still actually German. It's actually going back into German industry, right? And that's not even the graft or the corruption part. That's just the ethical corruption or the economics of war, right? That's just the economics of war. Yeah.
But we should not forget that Ukraine is one of the most corruptive countries in the world. So
and human trafficking and bioweapons, like white slavery, human trafficking, prostitution, organ harvesting, child kidnapping, and biological weapons. They're like number one in all of these metrics.
Yes.
Man. It's like a crazy Victoria Nuland, Tony Podesta, Joe Biden fucking wasteland. It's the most insane thing in our lifetime.
I've heard something very interesting in the American in the 19th century in the American slavery markets. The American slavery markets were closed every Saturday. Interesting, isn't it? So this makes also sense with Ukraine and the ties. And interesting, what I've heard, that many people from Israel, before starting the war, they bought land in Ukraine or in Argentina, in these two countries.
Yeah, there are places in Ukraine that are Israeli settlements back into Ukraine that have private security PMCs basically like defend them, and you can't go there like because they've privatized the highways and privatized the roads, and they have checkpoints, and beyond down some road it's like a whole Hasidic community, like tens of thousands of them or something like that. Yeah, there's been some events that have been captured, some celebrations about the war, and how there's been some pretty off-color comments from rabbis talking about how they're going to go in and take the Ukrainian women and stuff like that. But yeah.
It's the third force. So the first force is Zelensky, second force is NATO, third force is Israel.
Yeah, you're talking about their plans in Ukraine. I mean, they're trying to tie together some things kind of interestingly, because there was a long understanding that Israel was like long-term not fungible. That like they're gonna have to leave Israel. Like the Israelis are gonna have to leave Israel, but they might not have to. But along the policies that they were taking, they were going to have to. If they're gonna start a war with Iran, they're gonna have to leave, because Iran could definitely erase Israel if they were pushed. Even if you nuke Tehran, they've decentralized their missile launching platforms. They have hundreds of underground tunnels. They have scores and scores of underground cities housing these missiles. Underground cities they've built.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Locations, decentralized. So they just, this is like, people don't understand how well prepared the Iranians are for this type of total war. It's whatever the United States and Israel have done in Iran, definitely the Iranians don't want it, for sure. Definitely it hurts some, but they are very well prepared for it. Like they've been wargaming out these scenarios exactly as this for a generation.
Yeah. Thank you. Monty, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, Joaquin, pleasure to be with you here again. I apologize for coming in late, network problems on my end, but very fascinated by all this. I happened to watch your interview with Colonel Watkins, which was also very fascinating, looking at the Gladio aspect. And my opinion, a lot of Gladio ended up in Ukraine also. But, we've gone through various reiterations of Trump. It was something like Obama. I think people got hope-a-doped. In the initial election of him, a lot of people came on board with his commitment to get us out of these endless wars and not to involve ourselves with that. And I think that's what pushed him over the top and gave him his traction. And even myself, I was thinking, well, I'll give him some time, but he didn't pull out of Ukraine and things kept escalating. And it's at a point now with this totally horrendous situation we're in, with obvious escalation worldwide, which is going to have implications for decades. In other words, this blowout of this economy is not going to go away. And I happened to run across a quote, I think from Alex Krainer, which kind of struck with me. And it's called Hanlon's razor. It's something like Murphy's Law. And in Hanlon's razor, it says, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And I'm beginning to question that law or that assumption, because I think we've been assuming all of this is just incompetence. It's stupidity. In other words, Trump got himself into something and he's idiotic and he doesn't have the people around him that can get us through this. And he's being manipulated by various forces in this. And I'm beginning to question that, because I think the invisible hand behind this knew very well, like you said, what they're getting into. In other words, this has been gamed out for decades. So it's These are very clever people. And it appears to me that they knew what the outcomes of this would be insofar as the blowout of the world economy. So I'm thinking that was intentional. In other words, the money people don't give a shit about money. They could just invent new money. They're concerned with power and resources. And in line with that, it appears to me that they knew what they were doing, and they're willing to sacrifice human beings to this end. In other words, it's just, most people can't imagine this, but in my estimation, I think even Israel is being sacrificed to the and as Ukraine was, as is these 50,000 troops that are being sent in there that have no chance of winning. I think they're willing to sacrifice this to their ends. I think we're dealing with that level of evil. And so I would like to run that past you insofar as your observations, your opinion of that. And also one more thing that struck
Okay,
me
you got,
recently.
I'm on two right now, but yeah. Because I can
go
try
ahead.
to do notes and then you can come back.
Go with that and I'll come back.
Okay. So yes, Hanlon's razor is a very short-sighted, very no reality in connection with that. You should definitely ascribe, to malice, things which have clear winners, right? Like if a person accidentally slips and falls on $250,000 every time they slip and fall, then it's not stupidity. That's a strategy, right? That's like staging a slip and fall because you have lawyers ready, right? So that's malice. That's not stupidity. That's not clumsiness. So absolutely, it's very important. Like Hanlon's razor is one of the worst aphorisms that has infected. I think it's part of the dumbing down of critical thinking. It's not a truism, it's an anti-truism. And it gets people lined up to buy, bridges in Brooklyn, and I would say that instead, in politics, there are no coincidences, right? I would say that that war is an extension of politics by other means, and I would say that the first casualty in war is truth. Like I said, so if you put those three together, you can get a much clearer picture of what's going on. And now, in terms of the question about evil and this, think the jury's out on that, but to me it seems like if you have a war, it's very normal in a war. It's very unfortunate for the soldiers involved, right? But this is normal in war, that you open up a front as a distraction or to divide the enemy's forces. And you might have 250,000 soldiers down here and 50,000 up here, and you might send those 50,000 up here to lure the enemy away and divide their forces, even though that 50,000 soldiers are going to take very high casualty numbers by percentage, and you don't even really have a plan to reinforce them. Like, you're going to withdraw, they're going to retreat, but you're going to take, 20, 30, 40% losses. Maybe you're going to lose whole battalions in strategic maneuvers like this. So in war, it's not for the faint of heart. I think a lot of people would say, oh, that's just unconscionable, but if you're talking about the stakes involved in victory or not victory, the losing is the bigger loss than a victory that you have a strategic maneuver, that you put 50,000 guys out there basically, and 10 or 20,000 of them are going to get killed because they lured the enemy, because they were a distraction. Now, you don't tell those soldiers that they're a distraction. I mean, you like in South Park, like Operation Get Behind the Black Guy. It's like you don't tell them that they're the distraction, or that they're the cannon fodder, right? But cannon fodder is part of war. So I would say that the things are planned out, but I think that the chances of sending in 50,000 soldiers, it could happen. Maybe they'll just say that they did and they won't, but what they're going to do with 50,000, I mean, they had 40,000 there, they added 10,000. I don't know even what kind of posture, how to interpret this, how that fits into the narrative, but you get that reporting in news about some type of force buildup, but it's 1/20th what would be needed to have a ground invasion of Iran. And it's so in the two things that you said, like for sure, Hanlon's razors bullshit, but on the second part, I would frame it a little differently. I would say that this is, Israel is not really being sacrificed. Iran is not being sacrificed. I would say I'm even questioning to what extent those bases that Iranians have been striking in GCC countries, those U.S. bases, like how manned they really were. I mean, some of the reporting on numbers of U.S. losses might be more realistic than I originally thought. I don't know. But because like you're saying, and we agree, like all these things are so foreseeable. The point is that you're having a conflict that is like a controlled fire, just like you have controlled fires. This is, and the logic doesn't make sense to people. And again, it can totally fucking backfire in theory. Like it could totally be wrong strategy. Like strategies go wrong and shit like that. I'm just saying what I think the strategy is. World War I, Monty, they said this, this war is the war to end all wars. But I think even in the first months of that war, it was pretty obvious that you already had tens and tens of thousands of casualties and no end in sight. Whereas, in World War I, it was very clear to the French and to the Germans, like who was going to control the Rhineland. And that was really what that conflict between France and Germany boiled down to, was control of the Alsace-Lorraine or Rhineland, whereas which was the main industrial hub. And whereas with this war, there's no real definable metric objectively that you could measure, which makes it easy to get out of. It makes it easy to get into. It makes it easy to get out of. This is definitely a war that somebody wanted, and people are questioning if that somebody's even still alive now, or what's going on, if they're in hiding or what. But Israel's never going to be the same. But I don't think this is bad for Iranian people or Israeli people. And I think that their states are going to remain intact. I think that the Zionist system is going to remain intact in Israel, but they're not going to have as maniacal leadership. I think the Iranian theocracy is going to remain intact. I think they already probably changed their leadership a couple years ago when Raisi's helicopter crashed. I think that was their actual change of government, so to speak, at that level. So, like I was saying, like when Trump is telling Americans that there's a new president in Iran, and it's like, no, that's the same guy that they've had for a couple years. But it's true, he's new in the sense it's only been a couple years. When did the helicopter go down? In 2024? So but that guy was a principlist. He was a so-called hardliner. obviously, Pezeshkian is a reformer. He's a so-called liberal, so-called supposed to be more open to the West. You can see they've obviously been liberalizing in the culture and the society a lot. They basically got rid of the morality police running around on the streets. Women are running around without the headscarves now. So
Yeah, I think that most people, I think the insiders know this. They know what's coming about, but I don't think the general population really has a clue. I mean, we're looking at this thing, well, there's going to be some short-term pain for long-term gain. And that's kind of in the back of most people's mind because they don't want to imagine the worst case scenario, which I think is not just a probability, though. I think it's inevitable. My background is in logistics, so I tend to look at things as far as supply chains and sustainability and the requirements. Most people think they go to a grocery store, they're going to get their groceries. I think the implications of this, and so far as what we're looking at, is absolutely catastrophic. I mean, it's obvious we're headed towards a recession and inflation at the same time, stagflation. And we're witnessing the beginnings of that right now. I think even medium term, we're looking at all probability of an absolute depression. And the people in these days, the last depression, 1929, people were still close to the earth. They had agriculture. They had some means by which they could, but people these days, they would absolutely freak out. So the backlash on that would be civil unrest, God knows what else, which also the planners of this that want civil unrest, that want depopulation, want utter chaos, would be promoting this too. So, in my estimation, we could be headed something likened to a dark age where half the European population got wiped out in the last dark age. I mean, we're totally unprepared for that, but I think the people behind this know very well what they're doing, and it is by intention they're doing this. So, in that light, I see Israel is basically finished. I mean, it's going to be catastrophic as it is with Ukraine. But, the United States might weather the storm for some time, but Europe is definitely going to massive catastrophic blowback from that. The Philippines, Japan, Asia, right now they're feeling the effects of this, and it's only going to get worse in my estimation. So, in this line with malice, the people behind this kind of malice, I think their objective is something like suicide on the installment plan.
who
In
is
other words,
they?
don't just
Who is they? Because maybe we're not defining who we're talking about, because I don't see one. I see different forces even among the West. You seem to be saying they. Who is they?
well, basically, the power is not just the banksters. I think the banksters are the middle management. They can be manipulated, in corporations for profit.
But you mean
I think
the West? You mean you mean Wall
the
Street? You mean Trump? Do you mean Netanyahu? Do you mean the British? Do you mean who do you mean?
well, those with the ideology that man is a cancer on the earth. There's got to be depopulation. In other words, things can't go. They want power, they want control, but it's become unmanageable. There's just too many. If the cattle are sick, they got to call the flock. In other words,
Right.
they're
No,
not good.
I guess this is what I'm trying to so Russia, for some reason, I don't believe that any governments are doing things for reasons that don't make sense to them in their long-term economic model. So, but Russia is on a pro-natal policy. China is on a pro-natal policy. So why wouldn't there be those in the West that are like, oh, our anti-natal or our depopulation policies are not going to make us long-term strategic and powerful? Maybe there's forces in the Western elites that are like, oh, we need to have a pro-natal policy. But I know Nikki also had a question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the things that Trump does, how he does signal, especially with the Trump investment for babies that are born in 2026, this whole thing going off of the prenatal or the pronatal agenda. So I just based on your work, Joaquin, and like just looking at the things that instead of, Monty, thinking about the trajectory, this sort of negative, like, and hooking into these ideas and belief systems about like this kind of worst case scenario, which is fine. We can do that as humans. Think about, when is this shoe going to drop? And we're also traumatized that it's like, but thinking about that which hasn't happened. And if these people are so smart and strategic, which we, again, because we're not doing a liberal criticism of power, how that they they know that right, that this is all planned out and such, that what hasn't happened, and what are the other options for them, and is this an option that does actually take into consideration casualties and the economy and as Joaquin said, the long-term consequences and benefits, because they're not just thinking about the next 5 years, right? They're thinking about the next century. And so I look at it as like, this is a fight against the death cult. So you're talking about the overpopulation, sadists, death cult, just here and now sort of a thing. So I think what we are seeing is that fight between holding back that which could be, and again, replacing it with these pronatal policies, Russia, China, so why wouldn't there be factions within governments, including the US, that would want to promote that? So instead of looking at it as like, this is all, sort of this death plan. Yeah, there is a death plan, but there are also people that are not on board with the death plan. And I think that is really what we're seeing play out. And this is just one option among many, to hold back that possibility.
If I may, to piggyback on that, and thinking about the things that haven't happened, like when Israel, which I think Netanyahu has his own like death cult agenda, and Netanyahu definitely was attacking Iranian energy infrastructure, and then Trump said, no, you can't do that, and forced Netanyahu or whoever is doing that now to come out and say, okay, we agree not to do that. We're not going to attack the energy infrastructure. So I think that, and when you look at the attacks on GCC country energy infrastructure, the Iranians were claiming that these were false flag attacks, that the Israelis were launching them to increase the tensions between Gulf countries and Iran. Iran was saying we're only attacking military targets. So I think that the death cult stuff, we don't need a war in Iran. We already had something called COVID-19. If the people in power, if Trump at the time wanted to do a depopulation, all they had to do was enforce lockdowns. And if we did lockdowns, that would have caused several billion people in the third world to die. The United States has only 5% of the world's population, but it is 25% of the consumer base. The European Union is also about 5%, 25%. So with the EU and US combined with 10% of world population, but 50% of the consumer base, and if they did the lockdowns for a couple of years until some vaccine was ready, that's why the vaccine manufacturers had to be forced under executive order to produce the vaccine. They were saying, oh, we need 5 years research. Well, imagine you have lockdowns for that time. That would have been your death cult right there. You might have only had, look, it was 30,000 deaths or 24,000 deaths for every 1% increase in unemployment sustained over a year. Okay. In April, at the start of the pandemic, we had 22% inflation. If that 22% inflation had sustained over the course of that year, okay, that's almost what, 18% higher than median inflation at 4%, right? So that for every one of those points, that's 25,000 people. So that's 400, 200, 300,000, 400,000 people a year just on unemployment alone. At that level of unemployment, at 22% unemployment, that would have been already several million Americans dead. And that's the lowest possible. That's the stupidest way to calculate it. That's the most small number I could come up with, right? Now think about that reduction in consumption, Monty. Think about how many downstream, upstream jobs globally are connected to production and consumption, the service economy that enables the United States to consume 25% of global product, and Europe the other 25%. If you had lockdowns for years, you would have had billions dead in the third world. You would have had migrant invasions like the world has never seen, right? That was the children of men scenario. So why manufacture this 30-day fucking war in Iran now that is causing a 30% increase in fuel price temporarily and some logistical issues that you've noted, when the United States also is going to open up Venezuela and Greenland and compensate for that within a few years? That'll be flowing. And you're right about stagflation, and that is a price that we're paying for Netanyahu's war. The Iranians have been very consistent. The Iranians are not stupid. The most strategic people around, next to the Chinese probably. IQ is right up there. Average IQ in Iran is 103. That's 5 points higher than fucking Norway or Sweden. All right, that's huge. That means that's huge. Over distributed in a population that's meritocratic, and the smartest rise to the top because you have public education, things like this. So Iran is, they know their messaging. They understand they're giving Trump an off ramp because they know that in the very least Trump was pulled into it. But they also probably have a coordinated plan with Trump's people. Like, as this conflict has, my first take when this happened was like, fuck, Netanyahu got one over on Trump. But I understand because of contingency planning that Trump would have had a contingency, but that would not have been the optimal, that would not have been plan A, of course, unless you had a sense that the possibility or chance of that happening was well over 60, 70%, then you would structure your first plan over the most likely thing to happen. You understand? So from contingency strategic planning, why wouldn't Rubio and Witkoff been organizing many aspects of this with Argacci from the very start? I mean, that's how they ended the 12-day war in the first place. They manipulated headlines. They lied to to their own respective populations about the nature of the confrontation. They did fucking kayfabe. They pretended to attack each other to end the 12-day war. They knew that Israel was trying to sabotage all of this. Israel tried to assassinate Pezeshkian, right? They didn't try to assassinate Raisi. Raisi was a hardliner. Someone took out Raisi in 2024, and it wasn't the Israelis. People say, it was the Azeris. That's an interesting narrative. But then you had Pezeshkian go immediately to the Azeris and show that there was Azeri-Iranian friendship. It was like the opposite of what you would expect. So narratives are only as good as they account for all the known relevant details. They must go deep. It must be elegant. You must follow Occam's razor. The most parsimonious explanation is the best one.
Well, what I would question in this is it's not just about depopulation. In other words, you've got two systems in the world today that are diametrically opposed. They can't live together. And one is the hegemon that's committed to this technocratic control, corporatist control, and you got on the other side, it might be overly simplistic, but Russia and China right now represent something entirely different insofar as mutual cooperation for development. And they're actually developing. I mean, that's the fact of the matter, where the West has been going down the shithole, and they gotta create chaos and everything else to maintain
I
control.
mean, we used to call that, you know, the capitalist West versus the socialist East.
Well, it's not really socialist East. I mean, capitalism and socialism.
I'm just saying what that way of describing it used to be called
But
during the Cold War.
they have to take Russia and China out of the picture. I mean, that was the purpose of the Ukraine war.
Who
You've got-
has
and-
to take out? Who has to take out Russia and China?
The people of the interest in a system of hegemony,
In the
of
Western
unipolar
system.
control. That's right.
In the Okay, so I
Yeah.
think this is the nuance. This is the layer that I'm adding, because I would agree with you that those people exist. What I'm saying is that there's an inter-elite conflict in the West, right? So in other words, Monty, in the history of all empires and civilizations, when they're in decline, there's not a case that it has not produced a civil war or inter-elite conflict. So there's no doubt that the Western hegemonic system has been in decline. We agree on that. So
Yeah.
obviously you can get into like Star Wars, like the Empire Strikes Back. That's going to be one mode, right? They're going to try to make that war in Ukraine against Russia, right? They're going to encourage Bibi to do the genocide in Gaza that happened under Joe Biden's watch, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that is one layer. But because declining empires produce a fissure, a division in the elite, you have an inter-elite conflict, right? In the history of all inter-elite conflicts, right? The lesser power group within those elites sides with the plebeians. They side with the proletarians. They side with the middle class and the working class. They side with disparate rebel forces in the world against that dying oligarchy. That's the course of civil wars. That's the course of inter-elite conflicts in the whole pattern of history. So we would have to prove that it wasn't happening now. You see, the onus would be on those saying it's not happening. There are plenty of signs that it's happening. We could dismiss those signs that it's happening, but given that that's the general pattern of history, the onus would be on those saying it isn't happening to prove that it's not happening, right? So the inter-elite, so like in other words, there are people in the West that are like, there's a lot of strong things about the Chinese system. There's a lot of strong things about the Russian system. Our oligarchical system of milking our own population and having socialism for the rich and redistributing the wealth upwards while we don't make friends around the world and we invest in the military industrial complex to the extent that now we're broke, right? Like that doesn't work. Let's look at like models of other civilizations, either contemporaneously or in history, that work, right? And then that's how you can get out of, that's the impasse, that's the resolution of the impasse in those inter-elite conflicts. So do I think that Trump sounds fucking crazy most of the time all year? Yes, I think he sounds fucking nuts. Like it drives me fucking nuts how fucking nuts he fucking sounds, dude. But I'm looking at the dynamics through the lens of ancient history. Like let's look at the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Let's look of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire with Julius Caesar and the Optimates versus the Populares, right? You had this triumvirate emerge, right? You had like Gracchus and you had Caesar, right? And you had this conflict between the old guard and the new guard. And it was like, what's going to happen in this empire? And it took on geographic dimensions, right? You had Pompey, and Pompey had, even though he's part of the triumvirate, once Caesar is like taking power, right? Then Pompey breaks off and he has power geographically in Greece, but he's not Greek. You see what I mean? Like there was a transatlantic empire, and it was Europe and the UK and Australia and America and Canada, you know, together, right? But then that system is in decline, and it cracks and the fissures open, right? And a Caesar-like figure like in Trump. Look, the analogies don't port 100%. We're just saying generically, right? We're not saying literally. See, a Caesarian figure emerges in Trump and this populist popularist movement called MAGA. And then we see it looks like geography. It looks like, oh, now it's America versus the British, or now it looks like America versus the EU. It does take on those forms because those elites do have that power there still, right? So when you say, oh, well, there's like a technocratic death cult that's hegemonic in the West, you're absolutely right, right? But this is a fractured power, and there was like a different angle of a different insurgent group, and it's led by someone that, you know, maybe has like a narcissist fucking personality disorder, or he's a communal narcissist, or he says fucking crazy and ugly shit all the time. But you cannot outdo how crazy and ugly Trump sounds. You cannot fucking outdo it. So there's not going to be someone else that can say, ah, you fucking weak sauce, you fucking pansy, you fucking faggot, you fucking dove, you fucking peacenik, you fucking hippie, right? Like, because the empire always played that fucking game of accusing the peacemakers of being fucking faggot ass doves, right? So then he dons the mask of the most like warlike, ugly, you know, bellicose warmonger that you could possibly imagine, who laughs and jokes and brags about decimating Iran and destroying them and saying things that are meant to trigger the peaceniks and the lovers of peace. But he's not going to be fucking outmaneuvered and outmessaged by the fucking real psychopaths, you know, who fucking not Rubio, maybe Rubio someday, but Ted Cruz, you know, all these people that you've known for decades, the Cheneys and Bushes, and to a lesser extent Obama's, not their rhetoric but their actions. So he's not going to be outdone by them. So it's like we have to separate, we have to like analyze what's happening independently from all the fucking crazy words. And it fucking bothers the shit out of me, dude. I was just talking to someone I've met recently, Tommy Kerrigan, and he's like, yeah, man, I wouldn't want my mom to marry the guy. Like, you know, like sometimes the shit he just says, it's like, that's just his fucking personality. Like he's just fucking fucked up like that a little bit. But the results, like all the results so far have been pretty good, dude. Like the thing is, there's all this fucking propaganda that's acting like capitalism came with Trump. That before Trump, that we had some kind of fucking social system, and there was no oligarchs, and there was no technocracy, and there was no fucking Bill Gates, and there was no fucking Zuckerberg, and there was no Elon Musk. Like, we're just fucking hallucinating that Trump brought these people into power. That's fucking nonsense. Like, that's just the American system of the West. So it's not like what's my version of an ideal versus what was possible to steer things in another direction, involving as much of an alliance with those oligarchs as possible. Like when Putin came into power, did he reintroduce communism and nationalize all the oligarchs? Or did he manipulate one and turn them against each other and bring the ones in that are going to be for Russia and push out the ones that are going to be anti-Russia? Which of those did he do? He did the second thing. He didn't come in, he didn't reintroduce communism, national, like, hey, I have sympathy for that. I can see how that could maybe work too. But that wasn't the reality of the fucking time that Putin comes. They were already coming back from the collapse of communism. Like he got into power by manipulating the oligarchs that thought that he was going to be a continuation of Yeltsin. You understand? So then Trump is like, aha, that's the model. That's how it's done. The plan works through the plan.
Yeah, it's hope-a-dope, man. I'm still thinking it's hope-a-dope because the end does not justify the means. The end does not justify the
mission, man. I'm with you on the ethics and morals. I'm with you on that. That's why you're not president. That's why I'm not president. We are not cut out for that. We cannot kill, man. You are not a killer. That's the fucking problem. I'm not a killer.
And there are war crimes being perpetuated.
Yeah,
and
there are
just
war
this-
crimes being perpetuated. Dude.
just-
There are fucking little puppies being killed. There are children being killed. There are cats stuck up in trees. There are kids that are not going to have Christmas. There's a bunch of fucking fucked up shit happening in the world. There's radiation going on, or people getting fucking cancer. What we're talking about is what are the realistic possibilities in the world that we live in? You know, what were the alternatives? Like, right? Like, in other words, see, Monty, like when I said socialism, you're like, well, not socialism. Well, then you know, like, where were you for the last 100 years of political thought and political ideology? Because like most people that were going to articulate against a system that's run by a capitalist banking oligarchy would articulate in favor of a democratic redistribution of the wealth. That's called socialism, communism, right? But because you're from America, you didn't know that. You thought this is a dictatorship, these are bad things and stuff. That's exactly, you totally are the reason why that all of this is happening. In a way, we're all prototypical. Like, the world is against those things. You understand? The world is against, the world, like a lot of people are anti-communists. And that's fine. Like, that's also makes sense, because then you're just going to have another oligarchy that's calling itself the government, but they're going to be breakaway and unaccountable because you can't even vote them out. Right? So you have to, if you can't articulate, my point, Monty, is that if you can't articulate a viable vision of the future, which is not already an ideology which you expressively oppose, whether you know it or not, right? Then you're just poking hole, you're just doing one half of critical thinking, dude. You're deconstructing, but you've got no other viable model to articulate. You see what I mean?
there are other viable models, and there are many opportunities that Trump could have done that with Putin in Alaska, for instance, insofar as engaging with.
What makes you think they didn't? What makes you think that they're not doing? Like, everything that's happened so far is going in line with Alaska. Like, did they do regime change in Venezuela? No. Right? Are they doing the Sakhalin energy platform? Yes. Is Chevron and Exxon gonna go into Russia? Yes. Do Russia and China still have access to Venezuelan oil? Yes. Right. Is the Chavista regime still in power in Venezuela? Yes. You see what I'm saying? Like, everything in Alaska that was agreed to is going down. That's all being put into effect right now. Like think about this. Like, Iran is selling its oil right now. They are selling 10% more oil than before the war in volume of barrels, and they're making twice as much money because that's how much oil has gone up, almost twice as much. It's gone from 60-ish to 110-ish. Right? Like, so Trump's moves are financing Iran's war effort against Israel.
Well, in other words, Trump is playing some kind of 5D chess, and he's got secret.
It's called strategy. That's right. That's what strategic. That's why I'm a geopolitical analyst, man. Like, that's what we call it, strategy, bro. Like, when people finally get in over their heads, or there's too many variables to account for, they just go, oh, that must be sarcastically 5D chess. Yeah, actually, bro, it was called three-dimensional chess. Back in the 1970s, during the Cold War, when writers for the New York Times Magazine and etc. would write about gunboat diplomacy and Brzezinski and etc., they would say, oh, this must be like three-dimensional chess, and people really meant it. And then it became four-dimensional chess, and then around 2015, it became five-dimensional chess, and then I said, fucking six-dimensional chess is the next thing. How about six-dimensional chess? The criticism of strategy by invoking multidimensional chess was introduced into the discourse to criticize Putin, because people that were geopolitical analysts saw Putin was doing multidimensional moves. You see, Monty, the conspiracy theory against Putin is that he works for the bankers and that he actually was controlled by Yeltsin and by Abramovich and so on, right? But people that were actually strategic thinkers are like mapping out what Putin's doing. He's like, no, he's operating through the Yeltsin era oligarchy. Like, he got Yeltsin's blessing, right? You understand? Like, Trump got Adelson's blessing, right? Like, Putin got Yeltsin's blessing. He got Abramovich's blessing, dude. And then people are like, well, that just shows who owns him. That just shows who controls him. And we were like, no, no, no. Putin's making moves. We were saying this 20 years ago. We were like, no, watch Putin. He's making moves. He's moving through the oligarchy. He's making end runs around them, and then he's dividing them, conquering them, and bringing the loyal oligarchs into the service of the Russian state. You see, just like, that's the model, dude. That's like not some theory. That's actually what fucking happened. And the naysayers and the conspiracy theorists and the detractors, Monty, were saying, oh, that's four-dimensional chess. Oh, that's your four-dimensional chess theory. Okay, that's where the fucking term comes from. So when we started looking at what Trump was doing, okay, and I'm from the left, okay? We started looking at what Trump is doing and saying, oh, he's mapping and mirroring the same strategies that Putin and XJP are doing. Like, that's what he's fucking doing. That's his strategy. Like, you can learn these things, bro. You can learn them and then you can apply them. And like, wow, he's doing the same thing. So when people were saying, oh, look at Putin he's approved by Abramovich. Where's Abramovich now? Right? So you have to, it's not about idealism. It's about realism. It's about what is the gravity of the situation? Like, where is this really going, and what was really possible at any given time? So why, if there's a, like, when XJP, right, is coming into power, right, in the wake, through the Chinese bureaucracy, in the wake of the failure of Tiananmen Square, where Soros tried to make a color revolution in China, right? You have the Hu Jintao group, all these people moving. How did XJP maneuver in the Chinese bureaucracy, right? How did he utilize, like, Bill Gates did fucking the pandemic. They opened the fucking lab in Wuhan, and XJP is part of this plan. By your ethical purism metric, XJP is responsible for COVID, right? I'm just saying, bro, like, it would be. I'm not, no offense, but I'm just saying, like, if we reduce things to the ends justify the means makes the ends unjustifiable, right? The full expression is like, the ends justify the means insofar as the ends are justifiable, right? And realizable. So the ends justify the means insofar as the ends are justifiable. Okay? So what XJP did is, he's like, I'm going to coordinate with the fucking globalists to do a lockdown. Okay? But this lockdown in China is going to be, we're going to weaponize it against the maritime export class, because that's what the lockdowns are going to do, right? In other words, like, we want to disentangle from these long stretched out, how do you say, supply lines, logistics, the supply line security, the supply line costs, the supply line logistics were not sustainable. So this happened before in Chinese history. They had to burn their whole fucking merchant fleet because the maritime merchant class in China became too powerful. They had thousands, this was like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, man. Hundreds of years ago. They had hundreds of these huge boats. The Chinese had colonies in Australia and Africa and Madagascar, right? They burnt the fleet because the maritime oligarchy was too powerful. They were controlling the Chinese land system. They were taxing the hell out of it. XJP used COVID to do the same thing, right? Trump uses Netanyahu's attack on Iran to do something completely subverting the very system that those behind it believed it would be. Right? So is that five-dimensional chess? Well, we just call it strategy. You see? But to deny, like, do you play chess is the question. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you don't play chess, then that becomes something that you can use as an insult. But if you play chess, do you play 5-dimensional chess? You know, like that's a game. Like, talk to computer people too. That's actually a thing. You can look it up. So, I would just argue that the world is very complicated. If you follow my work closely over the years, and it is hard, man, because this is not suitable for a 30-minute show or an hour show. This is like many readings, many hours of talk, a lot of discourse over a long period of time to like understand all the details involved that support this worldview and understanding the strategy that's been afoot. Like, to me, I have big question marks, Monty. Like, for me, I have big problems with everything I'm saying. I could also critique. Don't get me wrong. Like, but it polarizes the shit out of me when it's like, when it's very clear, I can see like, oh no, this is like a misunderstanding. Like, I see where the problems are in some of my suppositions, but you ain't nailing them. You see what I'm saying? Like, there are like I definitely can see that there are other problems that can emerge, but they're not the ones that you're mentioning. You see, and that's okay. Like, but just understand that however smart you are, however smart I am, there are people smarter than that, right? And those people are doing shit in the world. And like China, they're not distracted. They weren't distracted by fucking pussy and rock and roll and pot. And you see what I'm saying? Like, they had a meritocracy. Like, it was like, study your books, study your books, pass the exams, study your books, pass the exams. Father, very strict, right? And then the smartest ones with 150, 160 IQ, they're fucking running China right now. So like, all this stuff that seems like too hard for us to comprehend is exactly how they're doing shit. It's beyond our comprehension. But once they do it, and then you can see it, right? People in the West that are like almost as smart can understand it. And our American system is fucked up, Monty. We never had campaign finance reform. People like Bernie Sanders never had a fucking chance. LaRouche never had a fucking chance. You had to be a fucking billionaire. Like, our system already produced that problem that only a billionaire was going to become president if he wasn't going to be controlled by the financiers. So history produced Trump. I didn't produce Trump. This isn't my fucking idea. Like, the American system produced Trump, and Trump is at least smart enough to see that the Chinese system works. He just said so the other day. So it's very, very interesting. Anyway, I'll table the rest of my time.
Well, thank you very much. I know Hartmut and Nikki have two comments.
To be continued. We're going to engage further on this offline if necessary, but I want to pursue this because
yes,
I think it's important.
Thank you, everyone. And but as you mentioned the word elite, Joaquin also has an elite audience that he calls, right? And the elite audience are the people who listen from the beginning until the end and then engage deeply with the full arc of the conversation. So, Joaquin, please invite them to where they can really get engaged with you.
Yeah, I would invite them to on Telegram at New Resistance. So that's at New Resistance, just like there on Telegram. And I'm on the channel every day, too many hours of the day. I donate a lot of my time to the public. I'm a individual philanthropist of the only thing that you can't recover in life, which is time. And I really give it to the public. It's totally a free channel. I do a live stream several times a week, sometimes 4, sometimes once. Live stream. If you catch me when I'm doing it live, totally free. If you want to hear the backups of them, there's a Patreon to access different quality and, recentness of the live streams at different tiers. But they're all there, all 700 episodes or whatever it is now. And this is a story that I've been mapping out for a number of years, over 700 episodes, 2,400 hours is not suitable for a 1 hour show. But I touch on some of the things. I love Monty. Monty and I, we've been talking back and forth for a couple years. We know each other through Matt Errett. So but this was just a fun conversation. But I like that he got me excited and, got me to because you get a little bit excited and then the brain starts working fast and you spit it out. It's like an argument with your spouse. It's like you remember all the bullshit. So, you know.
Well, thank you again, everyone. And please do your best in really doing your self study through Joaquin. And also, if you do a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and also check out the Patreon and whatever you can do to support Joaquin. And Hartmut, thank you, Nikki, Monty, Drago. And also, those who need to get in touch with me, just get in touch with me at graceasagra@ymail, and be blessed and be grateful for every day of your life. Thank you.